Tanith had not expected the cruelty to begin before she had even unpacked her trunk. She had been inside the palace of Ashenmore for less than an hour. Her rooms smelled of cedar polish and cold stone, and the servant assigned to her, a tall, quiet man with dark hair and a faded scar cutting through his left eyebrow, had just set a basin of warm water on her washstand when it swung open without a knock. 3 women swept inside, noble-born, all of them, draped in silks that cost more than everything Tanith owned combined. The tallest carried herself like a weapon, auburn hair pinned in an elaborate knot, a mouth designed for delivering verdicts. She surveyed the room the way one might inspect a holding cell. "So you are the Calloway girl," the woman said. Tanith straightened. "Lady Oriel," the woman supplied. And her smile was the thinnest thing Tanith had ever seen. "We have come to welcome you to court." It did not feel like a welcome. The second woman, smaller and sharp-eyed, was already rifling through the modest dresses laid out across the bed. The third lingered near the doorway, watching Tanith with open, undisguised pity. That was somehow worse than the rifling. "These are your things?" Lady Oriel asked, lifting the sleeve of Tanith's best dress between 2 fingers, as though it might be contagious. Tanith's face burned. "I was not aware there would be an inspection." A flicker crossed Oriel's expression, not quite respect. Closer to surprise that the mouse had teeth. She released the sleeve and turned, settling herself on the window ledge, as though she owned the room. "I suppose no one has told you the truth about your situation," Oriel said. "Men rarely bother with honesty when they are shipping a girl off to be someone else's problem." Tanith stood very still. Across the room, near the washstand, the servant had gone quiet, not the normal quiet of someone waiting for orders, a different kind. The stillness of a man listening through a wall. "What truth would that be?" Tanith asked carefully. "The king," the sharp-eyed woman said, settling onto the edge of the bed, "is not what they told you." "What they told me," Tanith replied, "was very little." Lady Oriel laughed. "It was not a kind sound, then allow us to fill in the gaps. King Fenric of Ashenmore is a brute. A warlord who built his throne on the bodies of anyone fool enough to challenge him. His temper is legendary, and his mercy is a rumor no one has been able to confirm. His last intended," the woman by the door added softly, "was a woman named Safara. She vanished in the night. Some say she fled, others say she never made it past the gates. The smart money," Oriel continued, leaning forward, "says she is buried beneath the east garden, but no one dares dig." The room went cold. Tanith's hands clenched at her sides. She could feel her pulse beating in her throat, wild and fast. Every instinct told her to nod along, to agree, to bond with these women over shared horror because surviving court meant making allies. And these were the only ones offering. But a stubborn, inconvenient certainty lodged deep in the center of her spine held her back. "Have any of you met him?" Tanith asked. The question landed like a stone in still water. Oriel blinked. "Met him? The king," Tanith said. "Have any of you spoken to him directly? Sat across from him, looked him in the eye and asked him a single question?" Silence. The sharp-eyed woman glanced at Oriel. The woman by the door studied her shoes. "I have heard a dozen stories about King Fenric since I arrived this morning," Tanith continued, and her voice was steadier than she felt, "and not one of them agrees with the others. That tells me people are guessing, not knowing." She took a breath. "I will not condemn a man on the strength of gossip I cannot verify. If he is the monster you say he is, I will find soon enough, and if he is not, then every cruel word spoken about him behind his back is a cruelty you will have to live with. Not me." The silence that followed as absolute. Lady Oriel stared at her. The sharp-eyed woman's mouth had fallen slightly open. The woman by the door had lifted her gaze from her shoes and was looking at Tanith with an expression that bordered on fear. None of them were looking at the servant. Tanith was. She had glanced toward him instinctively, the way a person glances toward the only still point in a room full of movement, and what she saw made her breath catch. His hand had frozen on the water pitcher. His knuckles were white. His expression was completely blank, the kind of blank that required enormous effort to maintain, and his gaze was fixed on her with an intensity that made the air between them feel solid, Then he blinked, looked away, set the pitcher down with a soft clink that sounded too deliberate. The moment passed. The women left shortly afterward. Auriel departed with a cool smile and a promise to check on her soon that sounded more like a threat. The sharp-eyed woman gave Tanith one last pitying look. The third woman said nothing at all. Then it was just Tanith and the servant, alone in the too-large room. "I am sorry you had to witness that," Tanith said quietly. He looked up, startled. "My lady, the gossip, the ugliness. You should not have had to stand there and listen to all of that." His expression shifted. A crack beneath the surface, so brief she almost missed it. "You are apologizing to me," he said. "Should I not?" He studied her for a long moment. "Most people do not notice the servants in the room." "Most people are not very observant," Tanith replied. Another beat of silence. His jaw worked as though he were chewing on a word he could not swallow. "Will there be anything else, my lady?" he asked finally. The register of his speech had dropped, rougher now, stripped of formality. "Your name," Tanith said. "I never asked. I should have asked the moment you walked in." "Wren," he said after a pause that lasted one heartbeat too long. "Wren," she repeated. "Thank you for the water, Wren." He left. She stood alone in the center of the room, her pulse still hammering, and tried to make sense of the strange weight settling behind her ribs. He was wrong somehow. Not dangerous wrong, just wrong. The way a note played in the wrong octave is still technically the right note. That night she could not sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the afternoon over and over. Just before midnight, she rose and cracked her door open for air. At the far end of the corridor, a figure stood silhouetted against a moonlit window, tall, still. His posture was nothing like a servant's. He stood the way a man stands when he is accustomed to surveying everything beneath him. He turned, and for one disorienting heartbeat, his eyes caught the light wrong, a flash of deep, burnished gold. Then he stepped back into the shadow and was gone. Tanith shut the door. She pressed her back against it and tried to breathe. In the morning, a knock at her door brought Jorvin, the king's beta, with an apologetic smile and unwelcome news. King Fenric had been called away on urgent business along the northern border. He would not arrive for at least another week. Tanith would be made comfortable in the meantime. "And Wren?" she asked without thinking. Jorvin's expression did not change, but a careful stillness settled behind his eyes. "The servant will remain assigned to you," he said smoothly. For the duration, he left. Tanith stood in her doorway, heart pounding, and could not explain why the word derision felt like a cage closing. The arrangement, as Jorvin called it, was simple. Tanith would remain in her chambers in the east wing of the palace. She would be given access to the gardens, the library, and the lower halls. Meals would be brought to her. A guard would be posted for her safety. And Wren would attend to her daily needs. "I do not need a personal servant," Tanith told Jorvin on the second morning. "Palace protocol." Jorvin replied without blinking, "I am perfectly capable of drawing my own bath and fetching my own meals." "Palace protocol," Jorvin repeated, and the conversation was apparently over. Wren arrived at her door each morning before the sun had fully risen. He brought a tray of food she had not requested, arranged with a precision that bordered on architectural. He poured her tea without asking how she took it, and she noticed on the third day that he had already adjusted. Less honey, more milk. He had been paying attention. "You do not need to do all of this," Tanith said, watching him set out a plate of warm bread and sliced pear. "It is my assignment, my lady. It is excessive. I grew up in a border pack. I am used to eating standing up over a basin." The corner of his mouth twitched. It was the smallest movement, gone almost before it arrived. But it transformed his face for a fraction of a second into a real human expression. "Then consider this an improvement," he said. Tanith narrowed her eyes. There was wit buried under that blank servant's mask. She was sure of it. The days fell into a rhythm. Wren was there in the mornings, silent and efficient. He disappeared for stretches in the afternoon, and she found herself noticing his absence in a way she could not justify. He returned in the evenings to draw her curtains, stoke the fire, and ask if she required anything further. She always said no. He always lingered for 3 extra seconds. as though he were waiting for her to change her mind. She explored the palace during his absences. The library was vast, its shelves reaching toward vaulted ceilings and smelling of aged paper and leather. The gardens were immaculate, pruned with a severity that felt more military than decorative. Everything in Ashenmore was beautiful, precise, and completely devoid of warmth. It reminded her of the man who ruled it, or at least the version of him she had been told to expect. She started talking to Wren, not because she expected answers, but because the silence of the palace was suffocating, and he was the only person who did not look at her with pity or suspicion or calculation. She told him about the Callaway Pack, the border hills where she had grown up, wild and wind-battered and relentlessly green. The way her father's hands shook when he told her about the arrangement with Ashenmore, how he had not been able to meet her eyes. "He did not want to send me," Tanith said one evening, sitting cross-legged on the window ledge while Wren adjusted the fire. "But our pack needed the alliance. We needed Ashenmore's protection, and I was the only thing of value we had to offer." Wren's hand stilled on the iron poker. He did not turn around. "That is a difficult position," he said carefully. "It is the only position I have ever known." She pulled her knees to her chest, being the thing that is useful, the thing that can be traded. The fire crackled. Wren straightened slowly and turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a quality she could not name. A recognition, maybe, a knowing. "What do you think of the king?" Tanith asked suddenly. He went still. "My lady, you live in his palace. You walk his halls every day. You must have formed an opinion." "I am a servant," Wren replied. "My opinions on the king are not relevant." "Everyone's opinions are relevant," Tanith said. "That is how you learn what is true. You listen to the people who have no reason to lie." The silence stretched taut. Wren's jaw tightened. She watched a muscle jump beneath the scar on his brow. And for one breathless moment she thought he was going to tell her the truth. Not a truth, the truth. "He tries," Wren said finally. The words barely rose above a murmur. "I believe he tries." It was the most human thing he had said since they had met. And it landed somewhere deep inside her and stayed. She wanted to push further, to ask what he meant, to crack open whatever was sealed behind that careful, guarded expression. But he was already moving toward the door. "Good night, my lady." "Good night, Wren." He paused in the doorway. Did not turn around. "The king is not what they say," he added quietly. "I hope you will remember that when you meet him." Then he was gone, and Tanith was left staring at the empty doorway with her heart beating harder than it should have been. She could not stop thinking about it. The way he said, "when you meet him." Not if, not with uncertainty, with a weight that sounded almost like dread. The next evening, she was walking the garden path near the north wall when voices reached her through the hedgerow, Jorvin's chinponjin unmistakable, even at a whisper, and a second voice, low, commanding, stripped of every deferential note she had ever heard from it. "Wren, this has gone on long enough," Jorvin was saying. "She is not Saphara. I will decide when it is enough." Wren's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who had never once in his life been questioned. Tanith froze. She pressed her back against the hedgerow and held her breath. "You are not being fair to her," Jorvin continued, "or to yourself. Fairness is a luxury I cannot afford. Not after what happened. What happened was Saphara's treachery, not this girl's. Tanith Callaway has done nothing but prove herself every day since he has arrived." A long silence. When Wren spoke again, his voice was rough with an emotion Tanith could not identify. "That is precisely what I am afraid of." Their footsteps receded. Tanith stood rooted to the spot, her mind spinning. She knew the name Saphara. Everyone in the territory knew it. The king's former intended. The woman who had vanished under circumstances no one could agree on. The woman Lady Oriel said was buried beneath the East Garden. But why was a servant discussing Saphara with the king's beta as though they were equals? Why did Jorvin take orders from him without flinching? And why did Wren speak about the king's pain as though it were his own? The questions multiplied in the dark, and not one of them had an answer she was ready to hear. 4 days into the arrangement, Tanith began watching Ren the way a healer watches a patient who insists they are fine. Small things first, his hands. They were calloused, but not in the pattern she expected from a man who spent his days carrying trays and drawing baths. The thickened skin ran along his knuckles and across the meat of his palms in the exact places a sword grip would wear. His fingers were scarred in fine white lines that spoke of blade work, not kitchen work. Then his walk. Servants moved with practiced invisibility. Shoulders down, gaze lowered, steps designed to attract no attention. Ren walked as though he had forgotten how to be small. His stride was too long, too certain. When he entered a room, his eyes swept the space in a single practiced movement, cataloging exits, windows, the position of every person present. It was a soldier's instinct, a commander's. The other servants treated him strangely, too. They did not speak to him the way staff spoke to one another. There was no teasing, no gossip, no casual familiarity. They moved around him with a deference that looked involuntary, the way a current parts around a stone it cannot move. One afternoon, a visiting nobleman arrived from one of the western packs. Tanith was reading in the library when the man passed through the corridor and nearly walked into Ren, who was carrying a stack of linens. The nobleman began to kneel. His body dipped, his head lowered, and then he caught himself so abruptly he stumbled. He turned the movement into a clumsy bow and muttered an apology before hurrying away. His face drained of color. Ren did not react. He adjusted the linens into his arms and kept walking, as though nothing had happened. But Tanith had seen it. A nobleman does not kneel for a servant, not ever. Not for any reason, she said nothing. She filed it away with every other fragment she had collected and tried to assemble them into a picture that made sense. None of them did. Not yet. The real discovery came on the fifth night. Tanith woke to a sound she could not identify, a low, guttural noise that vibrated through the stone walls of her chamber. She lay still for a moment, listening. It came again, strangled, agonized. Coming from somewhere down the corridor, she pulled a shawl around her shoulders and cracked the door open. The hallway was empty, lit by a single guttering torch at the far end. The sound was louder here. She followed it, barefoot on cold stone, her pulse climbing with every step. She found him in the alcove near the servant's stair. He was on his knees, one hand braced against the wall, the other pressed flat against his own chest, as though he were trying to hold his body together from the inside. His head was bowed, and his entire frame was rigid, every muscle locked and trembling. "Ren," Tanith whispered. His head snapped up. His eyes were wrong. The dark brown she knew was gone, replaced by a deep, fractured gold that flickered and surged like a flame being starved of air. The wolf inside him was trying to surface. She could see it in the way his bones shifted beneath his skin, the way his spine arched, the way his jaw elongated for one horrible second before snapping back. The shift was starting and failing, an engine turning over and choking every time it caught. A sound tore from his throat that was neither human nor wolf, trapped between the two. "Go!" he managed through clenched teeth. "Get out of here." Tanith did not move. Her father had been a border alpha. She had grown up watching wolves shift through pain, through injury, through the kind of grief that bent a body in half. She knew what a failed shift looked like, and she knew what it cost. She knelt beside him. "Let me help. You cannot help with this. You are in pain, and I am not leaving you on a stone floor." His laugh was a ragged, broken thing. "Stubborn. Frequently," she agreed. She reached for his arm, intending to steady him, and the moment her fingers touched his skin, everything changed. His wolf surged forward. Not the stuttering, choking failure of before, but a full, blazing eruption that lit his eyes like twin fires and sent a shockwave of heat rolling off his body. His back arched, his mouth opened in a gasp that was pure, undiluted relief, the sound a drowning man makes when he breaks the surface. For 3 incandescent seconds his wolf was there, fully present, fully alive, burning behind his eyes with a ferocity that stole the breath from Tanith's lungs. Then it collapsed. The gold guttered and died. His body sagged against the wall, chest heaving, sweat running down his temples. He looked hollowed out, emptied. But for those 3 seconds, she had felt it too. A resonance deep in her own body, a bell struck in a frequency only Leash could hear. Her wolf, quiet and unremarkable her entire life, the wolf she had privately believed was defective because it never stirred, never pushed, never so much as growled, suddenly lifted its head inside her and howled. The sound was silent, internal, but it shook her to her bones. "What was that?" she whispered. Her hand was still on his arm. She could feel his pulse hammering beneath her fingertips, wild and desperate. Ren would not look at her. His breathing was ragged. His hand came up and closed around her wrist, gentle but firm, and drew her touch away from his skin. "Do not ask me that," he said. His voice was rough and raw and barely held together. "You do not want the answers. What if I do?" His gaze found hers. The gold was gone, replaced by the familiar brown, but a new emotion lived behind them now, fear and want and fury at itself for wanting. "Then you would be walking into a place I cannot protect you from," he said, "and I have already failed to protect one woman who trusted me." He released her wrist. He stood unsteady and walked away without another word. Tanith remained on the cold stone floor, her hand still tingling where his pulse had burned against her fingertips. Her wolf was still howling, a sound that filled every hollow space inside her with a warmth she had never known, and a longing she could not name. She did not sleep again that night. She lay in the dark and listened to her own heartbeat and tried to convince herself that what she had felt was a coincidence, a trick of adrenaline and proximity, nothing more. But her wolf would not stop howling, and somewhere in the palace she could feel him. Not hear him, not see him, feel him. A thread pulled taut between her sternum and his, vibrating with a frequency that meant everything enormous and terrifying and completely beyond her control. Whatever was wrong with the servant called Ren, Tanith realized with a cold, sinking certainty that she was already too deep to walk away. A new rhythm formed between them after the night in the corridor, though neither of them spoke of what had happened. Ren still arrived in the morning with her tray. He still poured her tea with the quiet precision she had grown accustomed to. He still adjusted the fire and drew the curtains and asked if she required anything further. But the silences between them were different now. Heavier, warmer, filled with things neither of them had the courage to say aloud. Tanith did not mention his eyes. She did not mention the gold, or the way his wolf had surged at her touch, or the sound he had made when it broke free for those 3 impossible seconds. And she did not mention the howling that still echoed inside her every time he walked into the room. But she watched him, and he watched her back. The routine deepened. He began arriving earlier before dawn, when the light was still thin and gray. She suspected he was not sleeping. The bruised shadows beneath his eyes grew darker with each passing day, and the careful control he maintained over his body seemed to require more effort. He moved more slowly now, held himself more rigidly, a man gripping the edges of what was pulling him under. On the 7th morning, he brought a bundle of dried moonwort tucked beside her teacup. Tanith stared at it for a long moment before looking up at him. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it," Ren said. 3 days ago. You said the palace gardens had everything except moonwort, and that it was the one herb your mother always kept in stock." She had mentioned it once, in passing, while talking about an entirely different subject. "You remember that?" she asked. He did not answer. He set the teapot down and turned toward the fire, and Tanith stared at the back of his head and felt a dangerous warmth bloom behind her ribs. The slow thaw continued. She started testing him, gently, pushing at the edges of his disguise without fully understanding what she was pushing against. She asked questions designed to trip a servant. "What do you think of the northern border disputes?" she asked one afternoon while sorting dried herbs at her desk. "I think they are above my station, my lady." "That is a non-answer." "It is an appropriate answer." "It is a coward's answer," Tanith said, and watched his jaw tighten. "You have opinions, Ren. I have seen them sitting behind your teeth every time you swallow them. What is the point of having a mind if you refuse to use it in front of me?" The mask cracked. She saw it happen. The surface splitting along a fault line he had not known was there. "The northern packs are posturing." he said, his voice dropping into a register she had never heard from him before. Low, assured, commanding. They push because they believe the throne is distracted. If Ashenmore deployed even a single company to the Greyvale Pass, the posturing would stop inside a week. Tanith blinked at him. That is an extremely specific military opinion for a man who carries laundry. The color drained from his face. He caught himself, but too late. The words were already in the air. I listen, he said stiffly. The guards talk. Guards do not discuss troop deployments at Greyvale Pass. These are very indiscreet guards, he offered. Despite herself, Tanith almost laughed. The absurdity of his deflection, the absolute refusal to concede even when they both knew he had been caught, was so stubbornly ridiculous that it circled back around to endearing. Silence. He picked up the empty tea tray and left without another word. But the damage was done, and they both knew it. She did not push that evening. Instead, she told him about her childhood, the border hills, the sound of wolves howling at dusk across the valley, the way her mother used to dry lavender in bundles above the kitchen hearth, and how the whole house smelled of purple in the summer. She died when I was 11, Tanith said quietly. Fever. It moved through the pack and took her and 6 others before anyone understood what we were dealing with. Ren was sitting in the chair by the fire, a posture that had gradually replaced his rigid standing position over the past few days. His hands were still in his lap. His attention was fixed on her with a gravity so absolute it felt physical. That is why you learned healing, he said, not a question. I could not save her, Tanith replied, so I decided I would save everyone else. Arrogant, I know, not arrogant, he said softly. Brave. The word landed in her stomach and stayed there, glowing. She looked down at her hands to hide the heat crawling up her neck. I am afraid. You know, she said, and the admission came out before she could stop it. Of the king, of meeting him. What if he does not want me? What if I am not enough? The silence that followed was so charged she could feel it pressing against her skin. You are enough, Ren said. The words came out rough, almost broken. You are more than enough. She looked up. He was leaning forward in the chair, his elbows on his knees, his expression stripped bare of every defense. The servant's mask was gone completely. What remained was raw and open and full of an ache that made her mouth go dry. Then he blinked. The mask slammed back into place so fast it felt violent. Any king would be fortunate, he amended, leaning back. My lady. The distance in those last 2 words was carefully manufactured, and Tanith felt it across her skin. She wanted to reach across the space between them and tear the mask off his face. She wanted to demand that he stop pretending, stop hiding, stop performing whatever this was. Instead, she said goodnight and watched him leave, and lay awake for hours listening to the howl of her own wolf, and the ache that was growing deeper with every day she spent near the man who called himself Ren. The healer arrived on the 9th day. Her name was Brindis, and she had the kind of face that suggested she had seen everything the world could produce and remained unimpressed by all of it. Silver-streaked hair, sharp, dark eyes, hands that were scarred from decades of working with blades and boiling tinctures. She appeared in Tanith's doorway without warning and studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. So you are the one, Brindis said. The one what? Tanith asked. Brindis ignored the question. She walked into the room, shut the door, and sat down without being invited. I need to speak with you about Ren. Tanith's stomach dropped. Is he all right? Brindis tilted her head. That depends on how you define all right. She folded her hands in her lap. The man you know as Ren has a condition. I am not at liberty to explain its origins, but I can tell you it has been worsening for 13 months. The wolf inside him is dying, severed from him by a force I have not been able to cure. The words landed like a blow. Tanith gripped the edge of her desk. Dying? Slowly. Brindis confirmed, painfully. The episodes you witnessed in the corridor are only going to get worse. Left untreated, the severance will kill him within months. The room tilted. Tanith pressed her palms flat against the wood and forced herself to breathe. Why are you telling me this? Brindis studied her. Because his wolf responded to you. In 13 months of trying every remedy, every potion, Every approach I know, nothing has worked, nothing has even come close. And then you touched his arm in a dark corridor, and his wolf surfaced for the first time since this began. Tanith's mouth went dry. I need you to spend time with him, Brindis continued. Close proximity. Sustained physical contact when possible. Whatever it is about you that his wolf recognizes, I need more data to understand it. You want me to sit with him? Touch him? I want you to help me save his life, Brindis said, and the bluntness of it left no room for argument. That evening, Wren arrived at her chamber as usual, but this time Tanith gestured to the chair by the fire and said, Sit, he frowned. My lady? Brindis came to see me. She told me about your condition. She watched the blood leave his face. Sit down, Wren. We are going to talk about this. He sat. His shoulders were rigid. His hands gripped the armrests as though he were bracing for impact. How long have you been hiding this? Tanith asked. It is not your concern. Brindis made it my concern. She said your wolf responded to me, and that nothing else has worked. She leaned forward. So you are going to stop pretending you are fine, and you are going to let me help. His jaw clenched. You do not understand what you are offering. Then explain it to me. He did not explain, but he did not leave either. And when she moved her chair closer to his and reached for his hand, he flinched as though she had touched a live wire, but he did not pull away. Her fingers closed around his. His skin was burning hot, and beneath it she could feel the tremor, constant, barely suppressed. His wolf straining against whatever held it prisoner. She held his hand, and the tremor lessened, his breathing slowed. The rigid line of his shoulders softened by a fraction, then another, and the guarded expression on his face came undone. They sat that way for an hour. She talked. He listened. She told him about the plants she was studying, about a remedy she was experimenting with for muscle fatigue, about the fox she had seen in the garden that morning. Ordinary things, safe things. And slowly the wall between them thinned. It became their ritual. Every evening, the same chairs, the same fire, her hand in his. The contact steadied him in ways that neither of them fully understood, and the intimacy of it grew unbearable by degrees. She could feel his pulse through his fingertips. She learned the rhythm of his breathing when he was calm versus when he was fighting an episode. She learned the exact moment his wolf would stir, a subtle shift in his temperature, a quickening of his heartbeat. And she learned that if she tightened her grip at that moment, his wolf would settle instead of surge. On the fourth evening of this arrangement, his episode hit without warning. His hand clenched around hers so hard she gasped. His head dropped forward, his spine arched, and a sound tore from his throat that made every hair on her body stand on end. The wolf within him was fighting to surface with a violence she had not felt before. Tanith did the only thing that made sense. She left her chair and knelt in front of him, taking his face in both hands. Look at me, she said. Wren, look at me. His eyes opened, gold. Blazing, molten, fractured gold. She held his gaze and poured every ounce of calm she possessed into her touch, into her voice. Into the space between their faces, which was inches, close enough to feel his ragged breath on her mouth, close enough to see the flecks of amber in the gold, close enough that when his wolf surged again, she felt it in her own body, a second heartbeat slamming against her spine, and then she heard it, not with her ears, with a place deeper than thought, deeper than instinct, a place that lived in the marrow of her bones. His wolf spoke to hers, a single word, resonating through the bond she had been pretending did not exist. Mate, her wolf answered. The response was instantaneous, involuntary, absolute. A recognition so profound it shattered every wall she had built around the truth she had been refusing to see. His wolf was not just any wolf. The power behind that single word was staggering, immense, the kind of authority that could bring an entire pack to its knees with nothing more than a thought. There was only one wolf in all of Ashenmoor with that kind of power. Tanith pulled back. Her hands fell from his face. Her heart was slamming so hard she could hear it in her skull. She stared at the man in the chair, the scarred eyebrow, the calloused sword-grip hands, the military opinions, the way guards stepped aside, the way a nobleman had almost knelt. You are not Wren, she whispered. Every trace of color left him, completely, absolutely white. You are not a servant, you were never a servant. Her voice was shaking. You are him, you are the king. He did not deny it. He sat in the chair with her handprints, still burning on his cheeks, and said nothing, and his silence was the loudest confirmation she had ever heard. Tanith stood and walked backward until her spine hit the wall. Her legs were shaking. Her hands were shaking. Everything inside her was shaking with a fury so enormous it left no room for air. How long? She asked. Her voice came out flat and strange. How long were you going to keep this going? Fenric rose from the chair slowly, his hands open at his sides. Tanith, let me explain. Explain? The word came out sharp enough to cut glass. You have been in my rooms every morning for 9 days. You brought me tea. You listened to me talk about my dead mother. I told you I was afraid. Her voice cracked, and she hated it. I told you I was afraid I would not be enough for the king, and you sat there and said nothing. You let me pour my heart out to a servant while you were the man I was being traded to. It was not like that. Then what was it like? She demanded. Because from where I am standing, it looks like an audition. It looks like you dressed up in costume and watched me perform so you could decide whether the Borg Earl was worth keeping. His jaw clenched. I needed to know who you were, without the title, without the politics. I needed to see who you were when you believed no one important was watching. No one important. The words tasted like poison. You thought I would behave differently if I knew who you were? The last woman who knew who I was tried to kill me, Fenric said quietly. The words dropped into the room with a weight that crushed everything beneath them. Tanith stared at him, some of the fury guttered, replaced by a colder and more complicated understanding. Sephara, she said. He nodded once. His expression was carved from stone. But she could see the cost of the admission in the tension along his throat, the white-knuckled grip of his hands at his sides. She was the arrangement before you, he said, from the Varanth line, powerful family. The alliance would have secured the eastern border for a generation. He spoke in a flat, measured cadence that meant every word was being dragged from somewhere deep and painful. I trusted her. I brought her into my home, into my confidence. She stood beside me for 3 months, and I believed she was genuine. He paused. His breath came unsteady. On the night before our binding ceremony, she put a blade between my ribs while I slept. He touched his side, a reflexive gesture, unconscious. When the assassination failed, she cursed me, severed my wolf from me as punishment for surviving. Then she vanished. Tanith's hands were still shaking, but the fury was hemorrhaging out of her, replaced by a terrible, aching understanding she did not want to feel. Not yet. Not when she was this angry. So you tested me, she said. Because she broke you decided every woman after her must be a threat. I decided I could not afford to be wrong again. And were you wrong? Her voice was barely above a whisper. About me? His expression fractured. The stone mask crumbled, and what was underneath was raw, open, and devastated. No, he breathed. You were everything I did not dare hope for. Every single day, you were more than I deserved. Tanith pressed her palms flat against the cold wall behind her and forced her breathing to stay. Even, the bond was pulling at her. The mate connection that she now understood was real, not imagined, not adrenaline, not coincidence. It wanted her to close the distance between them. It wanted her to touch him. It screamed that he was hers and she was his, and the separation was agony. She did not move. I defended you, she said. And the pain in her voice was worse than all the fury combined. The first day, Lady Oriel and her friends were telling me you were a monster. And I stood up for you. I told them I would not condemn a man I had never met. She swallowed hard, and you were standing 3 feet away, holding a water pitcher, watching me do it. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. I know. Was that part of the test too? Did I pass? Tanith, please. I want to go home. The words fell between them and shattered whatever was left. Fenric stared at her. She watched his throat work, watched him swallow whatever he wanted to say, watched the man behind the disguise fold inward like a structure, losing its last supporting wall. If that is what you want, he said. He sounded hollow, empty in a way that made her throat close. Then you are free to go. I will not force you to stay. I will not force anyone to stay. The Safara wound was right there in the open, bleeding between them. He would not hold a woman against her will because the last woman he held had held a knife. Tanith nodded. She walked toward the exit on legs that felt borrowed. She gripped the handle and pulled it open. Tanith. She stopped, did not turn around. I am sorry, he said. For all of it, you deserved better than a test. She left without answering. She made it back to her room, shut the door, and sat on the floor with her back against it. The tears came hard and silent and without mercy. Her wolf was frantic now, clawing inside her with a desperation that bordered on violence. The bond was a rope around her lungs, tightening with every second of distance. And the pain was not metaphorical, it was real, physical. A crushing pressure that made it impossible to draw a full breath. She began packing her things. Her hands moved mechanically, folding dresses she had barely worn, wrapping the moonwort bundle in cloth without thinking. She paused when she reached it, the dried stems brittle in her palm, and remembered the morning he had set it beside her tea, because she had mentioned her mother once in passing. The tears came harder. She packed the moonwort anyway. By midnight, her trunk was closed and her room was bare. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands in her lap, and waited for morning. The ache was spreading, leaching into her limbs, her spine, her skull. A headache bloomed behind her eyes. Her hands trembled when she tried to hold them still. She told herself it would pass. She told herself the bond was not fully formed, that leaving now would hurt but not destroy. But somewhere in the palace she felt him, a vast, dark, collapsing presence. His wolf was dying. And she was the only person in the world whose touch had brought it back. And she was about to walk out the gates and leave him to it. Her wolf threw itself against her spine so hard she doubled over. She pressed her forehead to her knees and whispered, I know, I know. But she did not unpack. 3 days passed, Tanith did not leave. She told herself it was logistics, the border was a 7-day ride, and no escort had been arranged. She told herself she was waiting for weather, for word from her father, for the right moment. She told herself anything that was not the truth. The truth was that she could not stand up without the room tilting. The truth was that the headaches had become constant, a grinding pressure behind her eyes that no amount of willow bark could touch. The truth was that her wolf had stopped howling and started whimpering, a low, keening sound inside her that never stopped, not even in sleep. She had not seen Fenric since the night she left his chambers. She avoided the corridors where he might walk. She took meals alone in her room, though she could barely eat. She sat by the window and stared at the courtyard below, and tried to convince herself that the crushing weight in her body was heartbreak, not a death sentence. On the second day, her hands began to tremble, not from emotion, from a failure deeper than emotion, as though her body was losing its ability to hold itself together. She dropped a teacup and watched it shatter on the stone floor and could not summon the energy to clean it up. She gripped the edge of the desk and watched her fingers shake and could not make them stop. On the third morning, she tried to leave. She made it as far as the main staircase before the bond seized her so violently she staggered. Her vision whited out at the edges. The floor rushed up and she caught herself against the banister with both hands, her knees buckling, her breath coming in shallow, desperate gulps. Every step toward the gate felt like walking into a wall of fire. Her wolf was screaming, a silent, agonized protest that vibrated through every nerve. She made it 4 more steps before she collapsed. A guard found her on the landing, curled on her side, shaking. She was carried to the infirmary. She did not remember most of the journey. When she opened her eyes, Brindis was standing over her, and the healer's expression was the most frightening thing Tanith had ever seen. Not anger, not pity, grief. How long has this been going on? Brindis asked. I am fine. You are gray, your pupils are uneven. And you collapsed trying to walk down a staircase. Brindis pulled a chair beside the bed and sat heavily. You tried to leave. It was not a question. Tanith closed her eyes. Brindis pressed her fingers to Tanith's wrist, counting her pulse. Her mouth thinned. She checked Tanith's temperature, the tremor in her hands, the way her eyes struggled to track movement. Each examination made her expression darker. You know what this is, Tanith said quietly. I know exactly what this is. Brindis withdrew her hands and sat back. An incomplete mate bond under extreme stress. Your wolf is tearing itself apart trying to reach his. If you had made it past those gates, the bond would have shredded you from the inside before you reached the border. You would not have survived the journey. She paused. Neither would he. The words settled over the room like ash. You could have mentioned that before I packed my trunk, Tanith whispered. You did not ask, Brindis folded her arms. You were too busy being furious. Rightfully so, but fury does not change biology. And biology is currently trying to kill you. Tanith pressed her palms against the mattress to stop the shaking. How is he? The healer was quiet for a long moment. Worse than you, she said finally. His wolf was already dying before you arrived. Your presence was the only thing that slowed the decay. Without you, the episodes have become constant. He collapsed in his study yesterday morning and refused to let anyone near him. Tanith's stomach lurched. Refused? He dismissed me when I tried to treat him, told Jorvin to leave him alone. He has stopped eating, he barely speaks. Brindis paused, and when she spoke again, her voice held an edge that sounded dangerously close to grief. I have served the Ashgrove line for 30 years. I delivered that boy into the world with my own hands, and I am watching him die by inches because he believes he deserves it. The words hit Tanith with the force of a closed fist. What do you mean he believes he deserves it? Saphara's curse is not just magic. Brindis said, it is a mirror. It feeds on what he already believes about himself. That he trusted wrong, that his judgment is fatally flawed. That anyone who gets close to him will be destroyed by the association. She fixed Tanith with those sharp dark eyes. You leaving confirmed every fear the curse has been feeding him since Saphara drove that blade into his side. Tanith's vision blurred. She blinked hard and felt hot tears spill down her cheeks before she could stop them. He lied to me, she said. And her voice came out small and wrecked. He did, Brindis agreed. He was wrong to test you, he was wrong to hide. But he was also a man who had a blade put between his ribs by the woman he loved. And when he woke bleeding in his own bed, the first thought in his mind was not anger. It was, what did I miss? What sign should I have seen? How do I make sure no one gets hurt like this again? Brindis leaned forward. The disguise was not cruelty, child. It was terror wearing a mask. Jorvin appeared in the doorway. He looked as though he had not slept in days, the composure she associated with him worn thin enough to see through. He took in the scene and his mouth tightened. She tried to leave, Brindis told him. Jorvin closed the door behind him and leaned against it. The king has officially released her from the arrangement, he said. She is free to go. He signed the papers this morning. Tanith stared at him. Even now, even dying. He was making sure she had the choice he never gave Saphara. He also ordered me to arrange an armed escort to the border. Jorvin continued. He kept his tone carefully neutral, but his jaw was tight. He wants her safe, even if the journey kills them both. Brindis made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a curse. Tanith wiped her face with the back of her hand. The pull inside her was screaming, a raw, desperate electric thing that wanted him with a ferocity she could not contain. If I stay, she managed. There is no guarantee he will let me help. He pushed me away once. He will do it again. Probably, Brindis said. And the curse? If I get close to him, it might pull me in. Almost certainly. And you are telling me to do this anyway. Brindis regarded her steadily. I am telling you what your options are. You can leave and die on the road. You can stay and keep your distance and watch him die in front of you. Or you can fight for a man who does not believe he is worth fighting for. She paused. The choice is yours. Tanith looked at Jorvin. The beta looked back at her, and for the first time since she had arrived at Ashenmoor, she saw him drop the mask entirely. What was underneath was exhaustion, fear, and the desperate hope of a man watching his king and his friend destroy himself. He will not make it easy, Jorvin said quietly. Nothing about this has been easy, Tanith replied. There was no choice. There had never been a choice. From the moment her wolf answered his in that firelit room, from the moment he set a bundle of moonwort aside her tea because she had mentioned her, Mother, once there had only ever been one path. Where is he? Tanith asked. His chambers. He has locked the door. I have the key. But I am under orders not to use it. Tanith swung her legs off the bed. Her head spun. Her hands shook. But resolve had hardened in her gut. Forged in the space between fury and love, stronger than either one alone. I do not need a key, she said. Bryndis almost smiled. Almost. Tanith walked through the upper corridors of Ashenmoor with the gait of a woman going to war. Her hands were still trembling. Her vision swam at the edges. Every step cost more than it should have, the connection draining her with every yard of distance she still needed to. Close. The guards at his door straightened when they saw her coming. The king has ordered no visitors, one of them said. Good for the king. Tanith did not slow down, open the door. The guards exchanged a glance. She saw the moment they weighed their orders against the expression on her face, and decided the expression was more dangerous. One of them knocked. No answer, he knocked again. Your Majesty, the Lady Calloway is here. Silenced, Tanith stepped past them and hammered on the oak with both fists. Fenric, open this door, or I will stand in this corridor and scream till every noble in Ashenmoor knows exactly why I am here. A long, terrible silence, then the scrape of a bolt. The door swung inward. He looked like death. The word was not exaggeration. His face was hollow, the bones standing sharp beneath skin that had gone ashen. The shadows under his eyes were so deep they looked like bruises. He had lost weight, visible even beneath the loose shirt he wore, and he stood in the doorway with the posture of a man who had not slept, not eaten, not done anything except endure. His gaze found hers, and the raw, desperate, devastating relief that flooded his face nearly broke her right there in the hallway. Then he shuddered it, squared his shoulders, and gripped the doorframe as though it were the only thing keeping him vertical. You should not be here, he said. The sound that came out of him was wrecked. Tanith pushed past him into the room. It was dark. The fire had burned down to embers. Papers were scattered across the desk, untouched. A plate of food sat on the table, cold and uneaten. She turned to face him. Close the door. He hesitated. Close the door, Fenric. He closed it. He stood with his back against it. And even from across the room, she could see the tremor running through his body, the constant shudder of a wolf trying to break free and failing. You tested me, Tanith said. Her voice was steady. She would make it stay steady. You lied to me. You watched me bare my soul to a man I thought was safe. And the whole time you were the one person in this palace I had the most reason to fear. He flinched. Each sentence landed like a blow, and she watched him absorb them without defending himself. I was furious with you, she continued. I am still furious with you. Part of me may always be furious with you. But I need you to hear what I am about to say, because I am only going to say it once. She crossed the room. He pressed harder against the door, but there was nowhere left to retreat. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat rolling off his body, close enough to smell him. And the scent nearly buckled her knees, because every molecule of her recognized it as home. The man who brought me moonwort because I mentioned my mother once is not a man I can walk away from. Her voice cracked, and she let it crack. The man who sat in a chair by my fire every evening and held my hand because it was the only thing that kept his wolf alive is not a man who deserves to die alone in a locked room. His breathing was ragged. His eyes were bright and wet and fixed on her with an intensity that burned. You hurt me, she said, and we are going to deal with that. But I am not Sephara. I am not going to put a blade in you. I am not going to vanish. I am standing right here, and I am choosing you. Not because of the bond, not because of the arrangement, not because my pack needs your protection. She reached up and pressed her palm against his chest, over his heart, and felt it slamming against her hand with a ferocity that matched her own. Because you are mine and I am yours, and I am done pretending otherwise. The mask shattered, the control, the distance, the careful walls he had maintained since the moment she confronted him. It all came apart at once. And what was left was a man in unbearable pain reaching for the only person who could end it. His hands came up and cradled her face, his palms rough and warm against her cheeks, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. I do not deserve this, he whispered. I do not deserve you. Probably not, she agreed and kissed him. His response was immediate and devastating. He pulled her against him with a desperation that stole the air from her lungs, one arm wrapping around her waist, the other cradling the back of her head, and he kissed her back as though she were the first breath after drowning. The bond ignited. She felt it blaze to life inside her, golden and fierce and overwhelming, a connection so profound it dissolved every boundary between them. His heartbeat hammered through her as though it were her own. His wolf was surging forward, not the broken, choking attempts she had witnessed before, but a full, powerful, joyous emergence that set his eyes blazing gold. He held her so tightly she could not tell where she ended, and he began. The world narrowed to warmth and the sound of his voice saying her name over and over, as though it were the only word he had left. The bond sealed. She felt it lock into place with a certainty that went deeper than bone, deeper than thought, a permanent, irreversible joining that filled every empty space she had ever carried with golden, blazing light. She clung to him and wept, not from sadness, but from the sheer, staggering completeness of it. He held her against his chest, and she felt the impossible, miraculous thing happen. His breathing slowed. His body went heavy and lax. The tremor that had lived in him for 13 months went quiet. He fell asleep in her arms, and the peace in his expression was so complete, so absolute, that Tanith wept silently into his shoulder from the sheer, devastating beauty of it. She let herself drift, let the warmth of him carry her down into sleep. The bond hummed between them, whole and golden and right. She woke in the dark, and the warmth was gone. She was somewhere else, somewhere cold. The air tasted of iron and ash, and the silence was so total it pressed against her ears like water. The curse had found her. Darkness surrounded her. Not the simple dark of a room without candles, but a thick, sentient blackness that moved against her skin, as though it were breathing. The ground beneath her bare feet was cold and smooth, neither stone nor earth, just absence shaped into a surface. "Fenric?" she called. Her voice did not echo. It died the moment it left her mouth, swallowed by the void. She walked forward because standing still felt like surrender. The darkness shifted around her, leading her in a direction she could not have chosen on her own. And then the void opened, and she saw him. Fenric knelt in the center of a space defined by chains, not metal chains. Chains made of shadow, made of memory, twisting around his wrists and ankles and throat in loops that pulsed with a dark, rhythmic energy. They tightened with each breath he took, and she could see the marks where they had worn his skin raw. He was not fighting them. That was what broke her heart. He knelt with his head bowed, his hands open in his lap, accepting the restraints the way a man accepts a sentence he believes he earned. Before him stood a woman. She was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, dark hair, sharp features, a smile that curved without warmth. She was not quite solid. Her edges blurred and shifted, and her eyes held a flat reptilian patience that made Tanith's skin crawl. Sephara, or whatever the curse had made of her memory. "You always choose wrong," the apparition was saying. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, and that made it infinitely worse. "You trusted me, and I put a blade in you. You trusted her, and she packed her trunk and walked away. How many times must you reach for someone before you learn that your hands destroy everything they touch?" Fenric did not respond. His head stayed bowed. Through the bond, Tanith could feel what he felt, and the sensation nearly drove her to her knees. Guilt so vast it had no edges. Shame so deep it had become architecture built into the foundations of who he believed himself to be. He did not think he deserved to be saved. He thought the curse was justice. "You are wrong," Tanith said. The apparition turned. Its beautiful face rippled with annoyance, the irritation of a predator whose meal has been interrupted. "The little border girl," it said. "Come to play savior? Come to tell you the truth," Tanith replied. Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "Since you seem incapable of it." She walked forward until she was standing between the apparition and Fenric. The chains pulsed darker, and she felt the curse push against her. A cold, invasive pressure that tried to find the fractures in her and pry them open. It found them. Suddenly, she was 11 years old again. standing beside her mother's bed, watching the fever steal the last color from her face. Watching her father's hands shake as he tried to hold it together. Hearing the healer say there was nothing more to be done and understanding for thee. First time that loving someone did not mean you could keep them, then she was older. Standing in her father's study while he explained the arrangement with Ashenmore. Watching him fail to meet her eyes. Understanding that she was the offering, the trade goods, the thing her pack could afford to lose. Then she was standing in a guest room, pouring her fears out to a servant who was not a servant, and the memory twisted in the curse's hands until it became evidence. Proof that she was foolish, that she trusted too easily, that every time she opened herself to someone, they used what she gave them. You see? The apparition whispered from behind her. He tested you, he judged you, he watched you perform and decided you were acceptable. Is that love? Or is that a transaction? Tanith closed her eyes. The curse was clever. It took real pain and real doubt and wove them into a conclusion that felt like wisdom, the reasonable conclusion, the safe conclusion. But Tanith had spent her whole life being reasonable and safe, and it had brought her here to a void made of one man's guilt, fighting for him because no one else would. She opened her eyes. He tested me because he was afraid, she said. And I was hurt because I was vulnerable. Those are not failings. Those are what happen when two people who have been broken try to reach for each other. She turned to Fenric and knelt in front of him. The chains writhed, tightening, and she felt the curse slam against her through the bond. Trying to push her out, trying to sever the connection. She grabbed his hands. The chains burned where they touched her skin, cold enough to sear, but she held on. Look at me, she said, his head lifted slowly. His eyes were dull, the gold completely absent. His wolf, so deeply buried the bond, could barely detect it. She cursed you because you survived, Tanith said. Because even with a blade in your ribs, you did not die. You got up, you kept ruling, you kept protecting your people. That is not a weakness. Fenric, that is the strongest thing I have ever seen. The chains flickered. A hairline crack ran through the nearest one. And you came to me in disguise because you were terrified. Because the last time you opened your heart, it nearly killed you. Her voice broke, but she kept going. I understand that now. It hurt me, but I understand it, and I forgive you. Another crack, deeper this time. The apparition behind her hissed. My mother died because some things are beyond our control, Tanith continued, her tears falling freely now. My father traded me because sometimes love looks like sacrifice. And you hid behind a servant's mask because sometimes the bravest people are the most afraid. She squeezed his hands until her knuckles went white. But you do not have to hide from me, not anymore, not ever again. Fenric's fingers tightened around hers. His eyes were filling with a new light, not gold, not his wolf, hope, fragile and terrified and reaching toward her like a hand extended in the dark. I tested you, he whispered, and you were real. Every moment. Every word, his voice fractured. How do I trust that I will not ruin this? You do not trust it, Tanith said. You choose it every day. Even when it is hard, even when the doubt comes back, you choose to stay, and I choose to stay, and we keep choosing until the choosing becomes easy. The chains shattered. The sound was enormous, months, a thunderclap that split the void from end to end and sent the fragments of shadow dissolving into nothing. The ash screamed, not Tessafara's voice, an older sound, an inhuman sound, the death cry of a curse that had fed on one man's guilt for 13 months and had finally been starved. Fenric fell forward into her arms. She caught him, held him, felt his body shake as everything he had been carrying broke open and poured out of him. She pressed her face against his hair and held on. I have you, she whispered. I have you. The void dissolved. Light poured in from every direction, and beneath her hands she felt it. His wolf, surging upward, not broken, not stuttering. Whole and blazing and magnificent, it burst through him like a sunrise, and his eyes opened golden and clear and full of a peace she had never seen in them before. They woke together in his bed, tangled in each other, the bond humming between them like a song. Fenric was weeping, smiling and weeping. He cupped her face in his hands and looked at her as though she were the first good thing the world had ever offered him. "Thank you," he breathed. Tanith kissed his forehead, his cheeks the scar through his eyebrow. "You are welcome," she said. "But you still owe me an apology for the water pitcher incident." He laughed. A real, full broken open laugh that shook his whole body. And she held him while he laughed and cried and let himself finally be held. The curse did not vanish overnight. Some mornings, Fenric woke rigid and gasping, the ghost of chains still wrapped around his memory. Some days, the doubt crept back, whispering that he did not deserve the warmth beside him, that it was temporary, that it would be taken. But Tanith was there, every time. Patient and fierce and occasionally very annoyed, because trust was not rebuilt in a single conversation. And forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. They fought about the test, about the lies, about the 9 days she had spent calling him Ren while he listened to her heart and said nothing. Some of those fights were ugly, and some of them ended in silence, and some of them ended with his head in her lap while she ran her fingers through his hair and told him that choosing to stay did not mean choosing to pretend it never happened. The court adjusted slowly, as courts do. A border pack girl as Luna of Ashenmoor was not what anyone had envisioned. Lady Oriel's smile became very thin at the announcement. But Fenric stood beside Tanith with his wolf blazing golden in his eyes for the first time since Saphara's betrayal. And not a soul in the hall dared challenge what they saw. He shifted fully on the night of their binding ceremony. The first complete shift since the curse. He ran through the Ashenmoor forest in wolf form with Tanith beside him. And the sound he made when he threw his head back and howled was so full of joy that the entire pack heard it and answered. Months later, Tanith woke in the pale gray light of early morning. Fenric was asleep beside her, his expression peaceful, his breathing deep and even. One arm was draped across her waist. His hand rested open against her hip, relaxed in a way it never was when he was awake. No nightmares, no chains. No void waiting to pull him under. She studied him for a long, quiet moment. The scar through his eyebrow. The mouth that was softer in sleep than he would ever allow it to be while conscious. The man who had come to her dressed as a servant because he was too afraid to come as himself. She pressed a kiss to his shoulder and settled back against him. His arm tightened around her in sleep, pulling her closer, and a low, contented sound rumbled through his chest. Outside, the first birds were singing over Ashenmoor. Tanith closed her eyes and let herself be held. And they slept.